There was a recent episode of The Daily Tea which I thought was very, very interesting. It had Jeremy Hunt and a failed Tory MP who was voted out at the last election due to the general debacle of immigration that happened during the Tories' time in power. Now, there's a couple of important moments in that debate that I think shone a light on why we are in the pickle that we're in with regards to immigration. But also, I'm also going to look at another clip with Richard Tice to give you an idea of the type of problem that we're looking at. Now, the first thing to bear in mind is the delusion of the Tory party and the fact that there are still people within the Tory party who believe things like this.
Alex Chalk, do you think you lost your seat because your friend and Conservative colleague Rishi Sunak could not stop the boats?
Not for that reason alone. No, I think, look, on the streets in Cheltenham, the elastic of public trust snapped candidly when Dominic Cummings sat in the Rose Garden and said, I went to Barnard Castle to test my eyesight. There was an audible twang at that moment, and I knew that it was going to be impossible to pull that back. And I don't want to get into the weeds of Partygate and all that kind of stuff. Some people say it was overblown. It doesn't really matter. In Cheltenham, it was a massive deal. There was a white-hot anger in my inbox, and that was palpable. Then when there was the follow-on impact of the Liz Truss period, there was no doubt at that point it was terminal. So I knew it was coming. So notwithstanding the points that we're going to discuss today, which are properly made and which I feel very keenly, and my constituents also felt, that the truth is the die was cast and the way was set. Public trust had, I'm afraid, snapped.
So, no, Alex. The reason that you lost the last election and you were almost blown into oblivion is not because Dominic Cummings drove to Durham in the pandemic. It's got nothing to do with Boris Johnson eating a slice of cake, and it's got nothing to do with minor things like this. And it had everything to do with immigration. That was the main thrust of it. You know, the Tories managed the decline in the economy okay. Rishi Sunak brought down inflation like he said he would. But it was immigration, and it was the lies of repeated Tory prime ministers. And this rubbish that this man's talking, an audible twang happened in my constituency at Dominic Cummings and all of this, absolute garbage. Has nothing to do with Dominic Cummings. It did have something to do with Boris Johnson because of all the Tory PMs, Boris Johnson did relax his migration controls and made it far worse. Boris Johnson has been described by Matt Goodwin as a bohemian, somebody that it was in effect a lot like this Alex guy. He's a liberal Tory, and unfortunately the Tory party is riddled with these people. And you see this on display here. This is precisely the reason why. And here is more of it from Jeremy Hunt.
And yet, this real angst among your electorate, particularly those people who have gone to reform about this very issue.
Absolutely. I mean, when the Hunt family and the Sunak family were living in Downing Street, you had two couples, one born in India, one born in China, one an Indian Brit, and I was the only white Brit. And what was the most amazing thing about it was there was not a single story in the newspapers. Nobody cared. And I thought actually that was Britain at its best.
No, Jeremy, that's not Britain at its best. That's just called normality. If that's the best that we've got, then we haven't got very much. Britain is way more than what you've just described there. That is pretty far from Britain at its best. I would probably describe Britain at its best in something akin to the wartime spirit of last century. That might be Britain at its best. Certainly Britain in the 60s and 70s, when there was a boom of culture, that might have been Britain at its best. I can remember Britain being at its best in the 90s at certain points. And so there are many examples of Britain at its best, culturally, and as a society and a community. But Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak living in Downing Street ain't Britain at its best. I would probably describe that as Britain at its very worst, to be fair. And just getting into the intractable problem now of these small boat arrivals, because this is what's really, really bugging people. And these guys here do recognise it. They recognise that when the people are looking at the politicians and they're unable to solve it, it's not a good look, is it?
My worry is that, but although the numbers are a relatively small proportion of overall migration, it is the failure to control illegal migration that is causing people to lose confidence that elected politicians are actually in control.
Completely agree with that.
And, I think this is as much in Labour's interests as in the Conservatives' interests, because underlying this movement away from the two main parties that we're seeing in the polls at the moment and strengthening this Nigel Farage uni-party argument is this sense that, on a basic issue like stopping people coming here illegally and, us ending up with a huge bill for hotels and asylum processing and so on, the elected politicians just can't solve it. And I have to say, I think people are right.
They are.
To be
Yes.
angry about
the situation
this.
is intolerable. What is the point, so the argument goes, in a democratic system, if democratically elected parties, each of them say, we're going to sort this out with pick your slogan, smash the gangs, whatever. If they can't do it, then the sense of alienation is absolutely palpable.
And Camilla, my worry about, Keir Starmer and this administration is that they start, as I do, from a balanced, quite liberal view of the benefits of migration. But, after 14 years in government, I ended up being very hardline because I could see not tackling this problem with incredible energy was going to destroy confidence in the two-party system we've had for a very long time and corrode politics. Now, I think that Keir Starmer has reacted to the drubbing that Labour had in the polls at the hands of Reform by doing the wrong thing. U-turns on the winter fuel payment, which frankly make him and Rachel Reeves look weak, more backtracking on benefit reform, when actually the root of Reform's popularity is people's anger about migration.
Totally
and
agree.
This is where we need to see the energy from this government. And if Keir Starmer just gets to this point in 3 years' time, it'll be too late.
And that's right. It looks very, very bad. It looks like the politicians aren't in control. Certainly does. And you know why? Because they're not. Or they're ignoring us and they want it to happen. Probably a mix of both, to be honest. And this ECHR, to cover this finally, and this is the most depressing part about this for me, as I sat and watched this and, more of the same type of realisation hit me, as has been coming to me more and more over the past few months. Listen to how these people describe, well, in specific terms, listen to how the Tory Alex here, the ex-Tory Alex, now a lawyer, which is even more perfect, listen to how he describes the problem of the ECHR in its totality and why the politicians struggle with this so much.
If it is against the law and has been for 50 years just to come to this country illegally on a small boat, the question I get asked on the doorstep, I'm sure you did, is why can't we just send the Royal Navy in and stop it?
Well, there are several issues about that, but Madeline will know as well. Basically, part of the issue is intercepting small vessels at sea. You've got the international law of the sea, and in effect, if you act in a way which imperils people, so they end up willingly or otherwise jumping into the ocean and dying, then there are international laws which we would be in breach of. That's point one. But the second point is the one that Madeline makes. You can't just scoop them up and just say, right, we're going to put them on plane and land somewhere if that country doesn't give you landing permission. So that is the awkward situation. The other point that is worth making as well, which I think sometimes is lost in this debate, is the one which really bears emphasis. We talk about the ECHR because it's kind of the fashionable thing. People know what the initials mean and so on. But when we were in government, we got whacked by the Supreme Court in this devastating judgment, November 2023, about the Rwanda policy. And the Supreme Court was at pains to say, this ain't just about the ECHR, by the way. Even if you were to remove that, and do you remember the issue was non-refoulement, whether in fact we were able to say as a British government that we weren't sending back to places where unspeakable things would happen to them. And what the Supreme Court said, no, listen, even if you were to bin off the ECHR, you've got the ICCPR, the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, you've got the UN Refugee Convention, you've also got domestic legal obligations. And so when we're having this debate, which is immensely important for all the rule of law, for who we are as a people, for safeguarding our borders, for all these things that are massively important, we also have to have our eyes open and to proceed clearly and not gull the British people into saying, well, rip off the plaster of the ECHR and all your problems go away. That is not the case.
And if you are from the belief after listening to that perhaps it's reform, perhaps reform will do something about it. You know what I think? I think Reform's going to attempt to do something about it. I really do. I think Reform are honest in their approach to it. I do believe Nigel, when he talks about wanting to change this and wanting to bring Britain back to something of its old power. But you listen to this interview that Tice gave recently with Stephen Edgington on this very topic, where he outlined how difficult Reform know this is going to be.
Do you support the mass deportations of all illegal immigrants in Britain?
Yeah, the reality is, if you're illegal, then you haven't got a right to stay in the United Kingdom. So people should be removed, and I think most people accept that if you come here illegally, if you haven't been granted asylum, then you can't stay here. And we don't know how many people are here illegally because of the state of, frankly, the Home Office, our immigration systems, our border control processes or lack of them. And, well, we've just got to make that very clear. Can you do that instantly? No, of course not. You've got to, but at the end of the day, where we should start, actually, and I've raised this in the House of Commons, is we've got, give or take, 10,000 foreign nationals clogging up our prisons. So I've said to the Justice Secretary, for heaven's sake, let's clear out some space in the prisons, remove those people, return them to their country of origin, and people who are here illegally can't stay. It's as simple as that.
So should every single illegal immigrant in Britain be deported? Would Reform do that if you're in government?
Our view is that you can't be here illegally, so you've got to go through a removal process. But don't be juvenile and assume you can do that overnight or in the space of a month. You can't, and you've got to be grown up about this. Okay. People cannot stay here illegally. How long it would take to find all the people who are illegally, I don't know. I mean, we just, as a nation, incredibly, we don't know how many people are here illegally. Is it 100,000? Is it 500,000? Is it 1 million? Or is it more? We don't know, but we should know.
Why is it juvenile to ask whether you want to deport all illegal migrants?
I've just said we should remove people who are here illegally. But there's an underlying tone in your question, which is you must do it tomorrow.
No.
There is. That is exactly. There is an underlying tone in the way you're asking this question. You've got to deport people immediately.
No.
Well, that's how it comes over. Okay.
The reason I'm asking the question is because I asked Nigel Farage last year the same question, and he said no, it's not Reform's ambition to deport every single illegal immigrant in Britain. He said it would be impossible and politically impossible. And then I asked again.
Which is exactly why I've said people can't expect to remain here. If you're here illegally, you can't expect to remain here. But what we don't know how many people are here illegally, and we don't know, therefore, how long it might take to identify them and remove them.
Do you want to remove them?
Ultimately, people can't stay here illegally and expect that can go on forever. But the challenge is we could be here in 10 years' time, and there could still be people illegal. There could still be people here illegally because we haven't been able to find them and identify them. And that's just part of the challenge that whoever's running the government, I can't believe anybody genuinely says that if you're here illegally, you can stay here illegally forever. But what we don't know is just how many are here, how long it would take to identify people, and then remove people.
But in essence, that is what Nigel Farage was saying when I asked, do you support mass deportations of all illegal migrants? And he said no. That means that some of them won't be deported.
You're obsessed with this. And frankly, I do think that we need to have a sensible way of discussing it. You're obsessed with it.
It's not about me, Richard.
No, it is
It's
actually.
about the issue.
It's about, I've asked Nigel this last year. What is the thing?
Right.
Okay. The reality
Because I didn't
is
get clarity. That's the reason I'm asking.
you've had complete clarity, right? Which is you can't do everything. I think you're coming at this from a point of view, you've got to deport everybody next week. You can't do that. Be grown up about it. We don't know who they are. We don't know where they are. But the principle is people can't remain here illegally forever.
Right, and the principle is important, and that is why I asked Nigel Farage, again, is it your ambition to deport all these people? And he said no. And that's a principle. We will not deport all illegal migrants. And as a government, you have to make a decision. Are we going to try and deport everyone who's here illegally, or will we give some of them amnesty? There's no sort of middle ground.
Stephen, we're not in government, but if we are in government, then our position will be people cannot expect to be here illegally and stay here illegally forever. But I repeat the point, it will not be easy finding everybody. And I'm quite sure that's a reasonable position that anybody would respect. And that I don't know how long that would take to find people. That's sort of the definition. What we do know is that there are huge numbers of people who are here illegally, who are working illegally, for example, in the in many of the fast food delivery companies. Whenever you see someone who is essentially, why would you pay 50 quid a week to rent a sub account if you're here legally and you get a normal account for free? And about 40 or 50% of all fast food deliveries are by someone who is not the person that you were told was going to deliver it. And that tells me something's very wrong. So there's a whole industry of this illegality, which we need to stamp out. And but it ain't going to be easy. I just think we've got to be honest about that.
In the United States, Donald Trump last year promised mass deportations, and it looks like in some ways he's delivering on it. Hundreds of thousands of people have been deported from the United States since he became president. They want to ramp that up. They say that's not been enough. They've completely closed down the southern border. Again, coming back to reforms policy, do you share Trump's ambition of mass deportations in Britain?
Well, he's president of the United States, and if it's true that he is removing lots of people, then who are there illegally, then that's his ambition. And our ambition would be people who are illegally can't expect to stay here, and they've got to be removed. But I suspect that the US Home Security Service and Border Control, I suspect that there's more of them, and they've probably got a greater tracking system to know who's where and legally or illegal. I fear our situation is weaker.
So presumably you would want to try and replicate what Trump's doing in America.
He's from everything I'm reading, he is removing large numbers who are there illegally. And clearly the numbers are different because the US is so much bigger. But as a principle, people cannot stay here legally. And where we find them, they should be removed. There's lots of work to do in terms of, our issues with the ECHR. A lot of this stuff you can't do if you're a member of the ECHR, which is why the Conservative Party is in such a pickle on this, because a bunch of them want to leave and a bunch of them don't. You've got all the lawyers who are trying to prevent all of this. So, I think we've just got to recognise that we can have an ambition. Actually delivering it will not be easy. It will take time, and you have to go to war with some of the lefty lawyers, and we'll have to make it clear that we have to leave the ECHR.
And there you have it. I do believe reform is our best chance to do something. What that is, I'm not sure. I believe that they're going to have the fight of their life on their hands if they decide to take the British judicial system on, because we've got the Supreme Court, and as Alex, ex-Tory man, said, you've got a range of other, the UN court, the refugee court, the asylum courts, the ICJ, the ICC, never mind ECHR, and all the rest of the stuff, maritime laws and everything else. And we've got our own Supreme Court to beat. Never mind the House of Lords and the Houses of Parliament. You see the uphill battle that we've got, and none of this is even going to happen before 2029 anyway. That's when the battle will start, and it will take a full term in Parliament at least. And I think when Richard Tice was talking there, he gave you a real flavour of what he thought was going to happen. He knows the type of battle that Reform have got on their hands. Perhaps they know that they're going to fail. Perhaps they're just going to try their best. And can we ask any more of them? Certainly, the Tories, I've lost faith in the Tories after 14 years of what they delivered. Labour have been awful, just awful in a year. It's hard to believe how awful they've been. And so it's probably going to be Reform that has a go at it, if it's not a hung parliament, in which case Reform will be iced out in some way or another, or they'll be watered down to the point where it doesn't matter. If Reform doesn't win a majority, as Labour done here in this last election, then nothing's going to happen anyway. And listening to these problems to do with courts and modern day movement of people, you get the feeling that this problem ain't gonna be solved. And I think from a personal standpoint, when I look at problems in my own life and problems in society generally, understanding the reality of a problem is very, very important to moving forward with purpose and positivity. In understanding, perhaps, that this problem is not going to go away, and whilst I find that deeply upsetting and regrettable, that this is all just happening and we're powerless to stop it, or the politicians are powerless to stop it, perhaps there can be some measure of positivity taken forward, because in understanding that it can't be stopped, then I can start to make plans for my own life. Is it the case that our politicians are just going to stand around for years to come and just scratch their heads and go, oh, well, the Supreme Court or the ICJ or the ECHR and all the rest of it, what can you do really? If that's the case, if no one's ever going to solve this, if they are intent on destroying this country demographically, culturally, historically, and they just want to turn it all into a melting pot and a loss of Britishness and a loss of our history and culture, and they are intent on doing it, do we have the power to stop them? Even if we vote in Reform, who are supposed to be the saviours, have they even got the power to stop them, even if they've got a majority? As Mr. Tice said, they are under no illusions. This is going to be a struggle. And that's with a majority. It's very, very sad. But in understanding the reality of a situation, it can help you come to terms with it and say, you know what, I'm not just going to get continually angry about this because I have no control over it. It's a very, very pitiful state of affairs, but there it is. Thanks very much for your time.